The wind howled softly through the towering pine trees as 7-year-old Emma Reynolds pressed her forehead against the frosted window pane, her breath leaving faint, misty circles on the cold glass. The wooden cabin creaked gently beneath the weight of fresh snow, its roof sagging under the pressure of an early Montana winter. Outside, the wild was still and white, blanketed by the kind of silence that only snow could bring. Emma's tiny frame was wrapped in an oversized flannel blanket, her cheeks flushed, not from the cold, but from the fever that had been creeping in since the night before. She shifted slightly on the worn-out armchair near the fireplace, her eyes searching the tree line beyond the clearing. Her father, Jack Reynolds, had left for a hunting trip 2 days ago. He was supposed to be back before the storm hit, but now the sky was growing darker by the hour, and he still hadn't returned. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each sound echoing in the emptiness of the cabin. Emma glanced over at the small pot of soup warming over the fire, but the sight did little to ease the ache in her chest. The fever made her limbs heavy, her vision blurred at the edges. Still, she sat there quietly, waiting. Jack had always told her, if something ever happens, stay inside, keep warm, and don't be afraid. I'll come back. But even brave girls had moments when they didn't feel so brave. As the snow continued to fall outside and the shadows in the cabin stretched longer with the fading light, Emma leaned back, her body aching, her eyelids heavy. In the quiet of the Montana wilderness, a little girl waited, sick, alone, and hoping for the return of the only family she had left. A sudden thump against the cabin wall jolted Emma from her light, feverish sleep. Her eyes blinked open, unfocused at first, then darted toward the window. The storm outside had grown fiercer. Wind roared through the trees, and snow swirled in thick, angry gusts. But that sound, it wasn't the wind. Another thump, this time closer, followed by a faint whine. Emma sat up slowly, every movement heavy with exhaustion. Her blanket slipped off her shoulders as she shuffled toward the door, guided more by instinct than strength. She hesitated for a long moment, one trembling hand on the latch. Jack had taught her to be cautious, but something in the air felt different. Not dangerous, just desperate. With effort, she pulled the door open. 3 small figures stumbled in from the blizzard. 3 German Shepherd puppies, soaked to the bone, their tiny bodies shivering uncontrollably. Snow clung to their fur in thick clumps, and their eyes, wide, pleading, locked onto Emma's. For a second, she simply stared, unsure if her fever was making her imagine things. But then the smallest one let out a soft yelp, barely audible over the wind, and the others crowded closer, nudging one another anxiously. Emma stepped aside without thinking. The puppies rushed in, collapsing in a trembling pile near the fire. Emma shut the door behind them, sealing the storm outside. She knelt down slowly, draping her blanket over the shivering bundle of fur. Her hands trembled as she reached for the soup pot and poured what little was left into a shallow dish. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice rasping through dry lips. "I'll take care of you." And though her own body burned with fever, Emma watched over them as the storm raged outside. A sick little girl and 3 freezing puppies, finding warmth together in the heart of the wild. The fire crackled gently, casting warm, flickering light across the cabin walls. Emma leaned against the armrest, her breathing shallow and uneven. Though her fever had not broken, the presence of the 3 puppies seemed to give her a strange sense of calm. They huddled together, nestled close to the fireplace, paws tucked beneath their chests, eyes closed. But not for long. As the minutes passed, Emma noticed something odd. One of the puppies, slightly larger than the others, lifted its head and looked toward the door. Then another followed. Soon all 3 were standing, tails low, ears twitching. They weren't just stretching or exploring. They were alert, focused, as if they were waiting for something, or someone. The middle pup padded toward Emma and gently tugged at the edge of her blanket with its teeth. Its eyes met hers. Not playful, not curious, urgent, almost pleading. Emma sat up slightly, her head spinning. "What is it?" she whispered, unsure if she was talking to the dogs or her own thoughts. The puppy whined softly and turned toward the door, glancing back at her. One by one, the pups moved closer to the cabin entrance, standing still, waiting. Emma's gaze shifted between them and the icy door. Through the fevered haze clouding her mind, something inside her stirred. She could feel it. They weren't just lost. They were trying to lead her somewhere, trying to say, "There's more." But her legs wouldn't listen. Her body, burning with sickness, couldn't move. She sank back into the chair, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Tomorrow, I promise," she murmured. "I'll help you tomorrow." Outside, the storm continued its relentless howl. Inside, 4 souls waited. 3 pups desperate to save and 1 little girl too fragile to follow. Morning came slowly to the frozen forest, the pale sun barely piercing through the overcast sky. Inside the cabin, Emma stirred beneath her blanket. Her fever had eased, if only slightly. She could breathe a little easier now, and her body no longer felt like lead. The soft touch of a cold nose against her cheek brought her fully awake. It was one of the puppies, its eyes wide and hopeful, its breath visible in the chilly air. Before Emma could sit up, the cabin door creaked open. "Emma," a voice called out, rough and urgent. Jack Reynolds stepped through the threshold, his coat dusted with snow, rifle slung across his back. Relief flooded his face as he rushed to her side. "Thank God, baby girl. I got delayed, lost in the storm." Emma's arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "Daddy, they found me," she whispered hoarsely. "The puppies, they came last night." Jack blinked, confused, until he saw the 3 pups standing by the door, tails wagging softly. But before he could ask another question, the pups turned, scratched at the door, and let out low, insistent whines. Emma stood slowly, her voice steady despite the fatigue. "They want to show us something." Jack hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He grabbed his coat, wrapped Emma in another layer, and together they followed the puppies into the snowy woods. They walked in silence, the only sound their boots crunching through fresh snow. The pups moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to make sure Emma and Jack were close. After nearly a mile, they reached a small grove, where a rusted steel trap lay half buried in the snow. Inside it, collapsed and unmoving, was a thin, battered German shepherd. Emma gasped. "Is she?" The puppies ran to her side, nuzzling the lifeless form. "She's still breathing," Jack said, kneeling beside the mother. "We're not too late." Jack's hands moved quickly but gently, working the rusted steel trap open with a tool from his pack. The metal groaned as it gave way, revealing deep cuts around the mother dog's leg. She whimpered weakly but didn't resist. Her body was limp, her breathing shallow. The puppies crowded around her, licking her face and paw, tails thumping softly against the snow. "She's been out here for days," Jack murmured, inspecting her emaciated frame. "It's a miracle she's alive." Emma knelt beside them, her small hand trembling as she reached out. The dog's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, frightened, but still holding a glimmer of recognition. Emma whispered, "You came for help, and they listened." "We need to get her to Dr. Monroe," Jack said firmly. "Now." The journey back to the truck was slow and silent. Jack carried the dog in his arms, wrapped in an old wool blanket. The puppies trotted close, never straying from her side. Emma walked beside them, her hand resting gently on the dog's paw, as if lending her strength with every step. The winding mountain road to town was treacherous, covered in patches of black ice and fresh snow, but Jack drove with focus and urgency. When they arrived at the small vet clinic, the sign barely visible behind a snowbank, Dr. Monroe was already waiting, alerted by Jack's radio call. He took one look at the German shepherd and said, "Get her inside. She's hanging on but just barely." Under warm lights and steady hands, the vet team worked quickly. Fluids, heat pads, bandages. Emma sat in the corner, watching with wide, tear-inked eyes, clutching one of the puppies in her lap. When Dr. Monroe finally stepped away, he knelt beside her. "She's strong," he said. "Tired, hurt, but strong. With some time and a lot of care, she'll make it." Emma looked at the dog, now resting peacefully for the first time, and whispered, "Her name is Shadow." The days that followed were slow, quiet, and filled with care. Shadow remained at the vet's clinic for nearly a week, receiving around-the-clock attention. Emma and Jack visited every day, and every day, Shadow seemed to come back to life a little more. At first, she didn't move, barely lifted her head. But when Emma walked into the room, her ears twitched. The sound of that small, familiar voice seemed to cut through the fog of pain and fear. "You're okay now," Emma would whisper, sitting cross-legged beside the recovery bed. "You're not alone anymore." The three puppies, whom Emma had nicknamed Brisket, Maple, and Dusty, would curl up in a warm corner of the clinic and wait patiently, only perking up when Shadow stirred. Their loyalty was fierce. They never left her side for long. Dr. Monroe was amazed. "She's not just recovering, she's fighting. That dog has a will I haven't seen in a long time." Eventually, Shadow stood on her own. She began eating without coaxing, then walking again slowly but steadily. The moment she took her first unassisted steps toward Emma, the little girl clapped her hands, eyes gleaming with joy. "She's coming home," Emma said with certainty, turning to her father. "We're her family now." Jack smiled quietly. He had seen something shift in his daughter, something beyond happiness. Emma, who had once sat silent at the mention of her mother, was laughing again, talking to the puppies, telling stories to Shadow. There was healing happening in more than one heart. By the time Shadow was discharged, she had gained weight, strength, and a soft shine in her coat. But more than that, she had found something far greater: trust. And Emma had found something she didn't even know she'd lost: a new beginning. Winter deepened its grip on Montana as January rolled in. Snow piled high around the cabin, and the nearby river froze in rippling silence. Inside, however, life was vibrant again. Shadow had grown stronger. Her gait was steady, and her gaze more alert. She explored the woods near the cabin with her pups, now thriving and mischievous under Emma's loving care. Jack even built them a small pen near the porch, but they spent most of their time by the fire or nestled around Emma's feet. One evening, while Jack was chopping wood out back, Shadow froze mid-step on the porch. Her ears pricked, body tense, eyes locked on the forest edge. A low, unfamiliar growl rumbled from her chest. Emma, seated just inside the doorway with Dusty on her lap, noticed the change immediately. "Shadow?" she called gently. Shadow didn't move. Her fur bristled, her growl deepened. That night, Shadow paced. Not with restlessness, but with fear. She watched the trees through the window, her eyes scanning the dark woods like she was expecting something, or someone. 2 nights later, it happened. Jack was cleaning his rifle near the hearth when a knock echoed through the cabin, sharp and sudden. Emma jumped. Shadow lunged toward the door, barking in a tone Jack had never heard from her before. Defensive, furious, terrified. Jack opened the door slowly, rifle resting by his side. A man stood in the snow. His coat was tattered, his boots worn through, his eyes were narrow, and his voice was sharp. "I've come for my dog," he said coldly. "She belongs to me." Shadow stepped forward, teeth bared, a deep snarl erupting from her throat. Jack didn't hesitate. He stepped between them, eyes like steel. Not anymore. The wind picked up as Jack stepped out onto the porch, his body positioned squarely between Shadow and the stranger. Behind him, Emma stood frozen, one hand clutched around Brisket's collar, her wide eyes locked on the scene unfolding. The man didn't flinch at Shadow's growl. He smirked, the corners of his mouth curling without warmth. "She's mine," he said again, his voice low and bitter. "Ran off months ago. Don't know how she got here, but I'm taking her back." Jack's grip tightened around the rifle. "She didn't run away. She escaped," he replied evenly. "She was half dead in a steel trap when we found her. That dog didn't look like she had an owner. She looked like she had a captor." The man stepped forward, but Shadow lunged, barking fiercely, forcing him to retreat a step. Jack raised the rifle slightly. His voice was calm, but steel-lined. "You don't own her. You broke her, and we're the ones putting her back together. If you come near this cabin again, you won't be walking away." There was a pause. The stranger's eyes flicked between Jack, Shadow, and Emma. Something in his expression shifted, recognition, maybe, guilt? But he turned without another word and disappeared into the trees. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack slowly lowered the rifle and looked down at Shadow, who stood beside him, breathing heavily but calm now. Emma stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Shadow's neck. Her voice was soft but certain. "You're safe now. You're home." The weeks that followed were peaceful, wrapped in white snow and quiet mornings. The strange man never returned, and Shadow, once haunted by fear, began to relax, her posture softer, her tail wagging more freely. She would often sit by the window, watching the woods, but now it was in calm reflection, not dread. The puppies had grown into bold little adventurers. Brisket liked chasing snowflakes, Dusty had a habit of stealing mittens, and Maple followed Emma everywhere, her constant shadow. Jack built a wooden doghouse beside the cabin, but none of them ever used it. They all preferred the warmth of the hearth and the closeness of the family. Emma was different too. Where grief had once dulled her eyes, now there was a quiet brightness. She laughed more. She sang again, sometimes softly to Shadow, sometimes just to herself. Jack watched it all with quiet gratitude, knowing that something sacred had been restored in their little cabin. One sunny afternoon, as the snow began to melt into patches of brown earth and early pine needles, Emma sat outside with Shadow resting beside her. The puppies tumbled around in the snow, their joyful yips echoing through the trees. Emma looked at Shadow and whispered, "We made it." Shadow blinked slowly, her head resting on Emma's lap. "We're a family now," Emma added, her voice full of certainty, love, and a hope only a child could carry through a Montana winter. And somewhere deep in the wilderness, something broken had truly healed. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to hear from you. What part moved you the most? Was it Emma's courage, the loyalty of the puppies, or Shadow's incredible strength to heal? Leave a comment below. We read every single one, and your words mean the world to us. And if you believe in the power of love, resilience, and the bonds we share with animals, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It helps us bring more stories like this to life and reach others who might need a reminder of hope. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for feeling with us. We'll see you in the next video with another story that we hope will warm your heart, just like this one did. Until then, take care and stay kind. The cold crept in early that evening, the kind that settled low into the bones and stayed there. Deputy Ethan Hale guided his patrol SUV slowly along a winding service road on the outskirts of Maple Glen, a quiet mountain town cradled between the folds of the Adirondacks. Pines lined both sides like silent sentinels, their snow-dusted branches bending under the weight of a sky bruised by winter dusk. It was the kind of quiet Ethan had learned not to trust. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Max, his canine partner, a seasoned German shepherd with a sharp gaze and a soldier's discipline. Max had been with him through countless calls, from missing hikers to break-ins in cabins no one remembered owning. He rarely made a sound unless something was wrong. So when Max let out a low, guttural growl and snapped his head toward the tree line, Ethan didn't hesitate. It wasn't just a noise, it was a warning, a signal that something wasn't right. Max's ears stood stiff, his body suddenly rigid as if every muscle had locked into alert mode. His eyes tracked the shadows between the trees with laser focus, and a faint whine rumbled in his chest. Low, urgent, not fearful, but certain. He shifted once in his seat, then pressed his nose against the passenger window and gave a sharp bark. One, precise, unmistakable. Ethan immediately slowed the vehicle, pulling over to the shoulder without asking questions. He knew that sound. Max had smelled something, or someone, that didn't belong. "What is it, Max?" Ethan said under his breath, already reaching for his flashlight. As he stepped out of the car, the cold hit him like a slap. The air smelled of pine, distant smoke, and the stillness of something holding its breath. Max leapt down with practiced ease, landing silently on the frozen dirt. His nose immediately dropped to the ground, sweeping left, then right, then freezing mid-motion. He let out another low growl, head turning sharply toward a dense thicket just off the roadside. Then Ethan saw it. just past the brush, where the road met the forest's edge. A child. At first, she looked like nothing more than a bundle of cloth caught in the brush, but then it moved. A child, no older than 5, barefoot, shaking, and walking with the fragile sway of someone who'd been lost for far too long. Her dress, once pink, was now ragged and smeared with dirt and something darker. Her arms were wrapped tight around her chest, and in one trembling hand she clutched what looked like a torn piece of paper. Ethan crouched slowly, voice low. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Ethan. I'm with the police. You're safe now, okay?" She looked up, blue eyes glassy with tears locked onto his. Her lips parted, and what came out wasn't a cry. It was a whisper. "Please, help me. Save my mommy." And just like that, everything changed. But before Ethan could think about chasing ghosts into the woods, he needed to make sure the little girl in front of him was safe, warm, stable, and ready to tell the truth hidden behind those frightened eyes. Ethan moved slowly, not wanting to frighten her any further. The girl didn't flinch as he knelt down, though her lips trembled from more than just the cold. Max stood beside them, unmoving, his dark eyes fixed on her with a quiet, almost human concern. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ethan asked gently, holding his voice steady. The girl blinked. Once, twice. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Monroe." "Okay, Lily. Can I carry you to the truck? It's warm there." She gave a small nod, barely more than a twitch. When Ethan lifted her into his arms, she felt weightless, like a bundle of rags wrapped around a heartbeat. She clung to the collar of his jacket with one hand, while the other remained curled around a torn, crumpled paper. As they reached the SUV, Ethan opened the back door and placed her gently on the seat, wrapping her in his heavy patrol coat. Max climbed in beside her, not needing to be told. He laid down close enough for Lily to touch, but not so close as to scare her. She didn't pull away. Ethan reached for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Hale. I've located a juvenile female, approximate age 5, on Timberline Road off County Route 6. No shoes, visible bruising, possibly hypothermic. Requesting medical and child services at the station. Over." He turned back and saw Lily still gripping the paper. "Can I see what you're holding?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then handed it over. It was a child's drawing, shaky and hurried. A woman, a little girl, and next to them, a tall figure, larger than the others. But what stood out wasn't the size. It was the face. Drawn in harsh black strokes, the face had been completely scribbled over. Thick, angry lines crossed it out like someone trying to erase a memory they couldn't forget. A black X cut across where the man's face should have been. Ethan swallowed hard. "Is that your mom?" Lily nodded. "She told me to run. When he got mad, she screamed and I knew it was time." "Do you know where she is now?" Lily pointed toward the forest they had just passed. "He took her to the gray house, the one near the river. He dragged her there." Max's ears twitched. Ethan looked at him, then at the trees. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough to start a war. The police station sat quiet beneath a steel-gray sky, the kind that promised snow but hadn't yet delivered. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Ethan carried Lily through the back entrance, still wrapped in his patrol coat. Max padded beside them, his presence drawing glances from the few officers still on shift. Inside the interview room, a space rarely used and colder than it should have been, Lily sat curled on a vinyl bench, small hands wrapped around a steaming cup of hot cocoa. Her cheeks, once pale, were beginning to flush with warmth, but her eyes, they hadn't thawed. Across from her sat Jules Moreno, the county's senior child services counselor. Early 50s, calm, steady, with a voice that never pushed, only invited. She wore a navy cardigan over a collared shirt and spoke to Lily in tones barely louder than the ticking wall clock. Ethan stood in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't meant to stay, but he couldn't make himself leave. "She hasn't said much more," Jules said softly, glancing at Ethan, "but she did ask if her mom was still alive." Lily stirred then, and without prompting, she spoke. "He has a scar. Here." She touched her cheek with 2 fingers, dragging them diagonally from her eye to her jaw. Jules leaned in. "The man who took your mom." Lily nodded. "It's big." Ethan felt something twist deep in his chest. The drawing flashed in his mind again, the thick black slash across the faceless figure. "Did he hurt her?" Jules asked gently. Lily's voice cracked. "He gets really loud when he drinks, and Mommy cries." Jules reached for her hand. Lily didn't pull away. Outside the room, Max lay near the door, unmoving, his ears trained toward the sound of Lily's voice, and in Ethan's mind, the pieces were already starting to come together. Ethan sat at his desk long after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch in the interview room. Her small figure curled beneath a fleece blanket someone had found in storage. Max remained close by, his head resting near her feet, unmoving but always alert. Outside the window, snow had started to fall. Light, steady, silent. Ethan pulled up the department's archive case files, fingers tight against the keyboard. He didn't have a name from Lily, but he had something else. The scar. He opened a report from just over a year ago. The name jumped out at him. Claire Monroe, Lily's mother. The attached intake photo showed a young woman, thin, bruised, and trying to hold herself together. Her eyes were wide but distant. On her cheek was a fading bruise. Her left wrist was wrapped in gauze. The complaint had been filed against Reed Morgan, Claire's then boyfriend, a dishonorably discharged ex-infantryman with a history of violence and bar fights across 3 counties. Ethan scanned the rest. Arrested for aggravated assault, held for 7 months, then released. Claire had withdrawn her statement shortly after, but there it was. Identifying mark, long diagonal scar across left cheek, eye to jawline. Exactly what Lily had drawn. What she had traced on her own face just hours earlier. Ethan's stomach tightened. He opened Reed's mugshot. Square-jawed, thick neck, eyes like stone, and the scar, angry, deep, unmistakable. He picked up the phone and called Detective Maya Blake, a longtime contact from the Regional Domestic Violence Unit. Smart, relentless, and someone who knew how to find people who didn't want to be found. "You remember a guy named Reed Morgan?" Ethan asked as soon as she picked up. There was a pause. "Yeah, Claire Monroe. She came through my office once, asked about relocation, never followed through." "I think he has her," Ethan said. Maya's tone shifted. "Where do we start?" Ethan exhaled. "Where no one wants to be found, off-grid." By dawn, the falling snow had turned to mist, curling low through the forest like breath held too long. The air was sharp, metallic, tinged with wood smoke carried on the wind. Ethan stood beside his SUV, tightening the straps on his vest as Maya Blake pulled up in an unmarked sedan, her face sharp with focus. She wore tactical boots, a weatherproof jacket, and carried a folder of aerial photos gathered from old forestry maps and drone footage. "There," she said, pointing to a grainy image. "Cabin structure. Gray rooftop, partially collapsed, no recorded ownership, probably off-grid for years." Ethan nodded. "Close to the river, maybe half a mile from the logging trail. It fits what Lily said." He crouched beside Max and held out a scrap of fabric, a torn piece from Lily's dress that had been caught in the SUV door the night before. Blood, faint but real, and more importantly, scent. "You ready?" he murmured. Max sniffed once, then again. His ears shot up. That was all Ethan needed. They entered the woods at first light, the trees standing tall like cathedral pillars. Footsteps were muffled under wet leaves and moss. Ethan moved ahead with Max leading the way, nose low, tail rigid. Maya followed close behind, her eyes scanning everything. Every branch, every bend in the trail. After 20 minutes, Max slowed, then stopped. Ethan crouched. "What is it, boy?" Max sniffed the air, turned left, and veered off the old trail, straight into dense brush. Ethan followed without hesitation, pushing aside brambles and low-hanging branches. Then they saw it. Half sunken into the earth, almost hidden by vines and fallen limbs, stood a shack. Wooden walls bowed from rot. The windows were boarded. The roof sagged under snow. No lights, no movement. But smoke, thin, fresh, rose from somewhere behind. Max stood motionless, ears forward, body taut like wire. Maya whispered behind him, "We're close." Ethan didn't answer. His hand hovered over his weapon, and his pulse began to rise. They had found the place. Now came the hard part. Ethan crouched behind a tangle of bare rhododendrons, eyes fixed on the shack just 20 feet ahead. The forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed to wait. Max was stone still beside him, shoulders squared, tail flat, ears tilted forward. Every muscle in the shepherd's body was drawn tight, ready. From inside the shack, a muffled voice broke the silence. Sharp. Erratic. A man pacing, muttering, slamming something against a wall. Then came another sound. A woman crying. Maya, crouched behind a tree to Ethan's left, gave him a single nod. She had her sidearm drawn, breath steady. Her eyes never left the door. Ethan spoke softly into his radio. 2 bodies inside, 1 pacing, 1 stationary, suspect likely armed. We go on my signal. He reached down, brushing a hand along Max's back. The dog's muscles twitched under his glove. Then, now. Ethan moved like a shadow, boots silent on the wet earth. He reached the side of the shack, flattening himself against the rotting wood. Max followed, steps precise, trained, lethal. Inside, the man's voice rose. "You think they care about you? Huh? You think anyone's coming? You're mine. You always were." Then, a crash, a gasp. That was enough. Ethan pulled back the tattered canvas covering the door and burst in, voice firm, loud. "Police, drop the weapon." Reed Morgan spun around, wild-eyed, dragging Claire by the wrist. Her hands were bound, her lip bloodied, but her eyes were wide with hope. She'd heard the voice. Reed shoved her forward like a shield, rage distorting his scarred face. "I'll kill her. Don't think I won't." He never got the chance. Max lunged. With terrifying speed, the shepherd launched forward, shoulder low, jaws wide. He hit Reed square in the chest, teeth locking around his arm, dragging him down in a blur of snarls and flailing limbs. Reed screamed, thrashing, but Max held fast. Ethan rushed in, yanked Claire to safety, and spun back with his weapon drawn. "Don't move," he shouted. Maya stormed in behind him, gun raised. 2 backup officers tackled Reed, pried Max off, and wrestled the man to the ground. Handcuffs clicked. The screaming stopped. Ethan turned back to Claire. She was on the floor, gasping, shaking, hair stuck to her face. Her first words came out in a whisper. "Is Lily safe?" Ethan's voice cracked as he knelt beside her. "She is. She made it out. She found us. She saved you." Claire dropped to her knees before Ethan could even speak again. Her breath came in broken gasps, too shallow to steady, too loud to control. She clutched her bound hands to her face and let out a raw, trembling sob. Not the kind born of pain, but the kind torn from weeks of fear, finally unraveling all at once. Her shoulders shook violently, as though her body could no longer hold the weight she had carried alone in silence. The sound that escaped her lips was jagged, half cry, half relief, an outpouring of everything she'd tried so hard not to feel. Tears soaked the sides of her palms as she rocked forward, curling inward, trying to hold herself together, but failing. "She's safe," she whispered, as if needing to say it out loud to believe it. "My baby's safe." Ethan knelt beside her and gently reached for her wrists, cutting the zip ties with one quick motion. Her arms fell limply to her lap, trembling. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. All she could do was cry, like someone who hadn't cried in far too long. Max stood nearby, chest rising, mouth open, tongue out, but his eyes were locked on the woman he had just helped save. The storm had passed, though the air still carried the weight of everything it had taken with it. The clinic room was warm, quiet, and dimly lit. Walls painted soft yellow, the the kind meant to soothe. Outside, the snowfall had thinned, replaced by a hush that settled over Maple Glen like a blanket. Claire sat upright in the hospital bed, arms wrapped tightly around her daughter, as if letting go for even a second might break the spell of safety. Lily clung just as hard, her face buried against her mother's chest, fingers curled into the thin fabric of the hospital gown. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. Lily had fallen asleep not long after the reunion, exhausted, emotionally spent, but breathing slow and steady now, her body pressed close to Claire's, one hand still curled in the folds of her gown. At the foot of the bed, Max lay curled like a sentry, his big head resting on his paws, ears flicking now and then with the distant creak of a hallway door. His eyes, though half-lidded, remained fixed on the child he'd helped save. In the far corner of the room, Ethan stood in silence, his uniform jacket folded over one arm, the other resting loosely by his side. He looked different now. Still the same man, but softer somehow, like a knot inside him had finally loosened. Claire glanced up, eyes glassy but clear, her voice cracked when she spoke. He hasn't left her side. Ethan nodded, voice low. Max remembers. He doesn't forget the ones he finds. Claire didn't speak again, but the way she looked at Ethan, quiet, full of something between gratitude and disbelief, said enough. There were no grand gestures, no promises made aloud. Just the knowledge that somehow, against the odds, the right people had found each other in time. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep, sighing against her mother's chest, and Max lifted his head, ears twitching, as if making sure all was still well. Then, satisfied, he laid it back down and closed his eyes. Ethan moved to the doorway, pausing for just a moment to take in the scene. A mother who survived, a child who didn't give up, and a dog who refused to stop searching. He exhaled slowly and turned to go. Behind him, warmth had returned to a space once filled with fear, and in that warmth, something fragile was beginning to grow again. Hope.